All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. We are expecting a few more people to trickle in, but thank you so much for everybody who has joined the discussion. We're really excited to have Anilji. It's my pleasure to welcome him. He has taken the time to come and speak with our Ekal Vidyalaya Houston group, and he has invited some of his friends and family as well to the discussion. So thank you all so much for joining. Anilji brings a ton of research and passion for ancient Indian history, and I am most definitely excited to learn something that perhaps I did not learn in school from Anilji today. So I won't take up too much of everybody's time. We're all here, Anilji, to learn from you today. So with that, I'd like to invite you to please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Avni and Umaji and the entire Ekal Vidyalaya Houston chapter for giving me this wonderful opportunity and taking your valuable time also to listen to me. And so I'm really thankful for that. And so now I go ahead with this topic. So we're taking a fresh look or a new look at India's history, and I imagine the audience would be from with a different background of history, especially older people would be a little bit more familiar. Who grew up in India would be more familiar with Indian history, and compared to the younger generation who grew up over here, maybe less familiar with India's history. So there's going to be a lot of new information for the younger generation, perhaps. But bear with me, so we will have time. I will end at about 45, so and then we'll have 15 minutes for question and answers. And so please feel free to ask any question that we can shed light on. The topic is the history and chronology. Chronology means the timeline, and the focus is on ancient India. That is the India before AD 1192, let's say even more, before AD 1000. So we're talking about really the history of India and its timeline, that is thousand, the whole entire time span before the AD 1000. That's what we're talking about. Let's say, how do I, okay, there, slide is not moving. Oh, there it is. Okay. Now, this is the rough outline for the presentation I'll follow. So why this book? What's new in this book? Distortion of our history and when, why, and how it happened. Then how do we know our true history? So what are the sources of our true history? And of course, I also want to acknowledge the past contributors to teaching us the history. We, of course, have to talk about panchangas and calendars. Since we're talking about timeline, chronology, it's panchangas and calendars are vital portion. They play a critical role in keeping track of time. I'll also touch somewhat on the extensive genealogies, what's called Vanshavali in Indian and Sanskrit. So we have extensive record of genealogies, and I'll just show a few of them to give you an idea. Mahabharata war, we'll talk about that. And then time permitting, I'll go into the next topics listed, but probably we might not have the time to go into those. So coming to now, why this book? There's a glaring contradiction in the history that we have been taught and still being taught. And what is that contradiction? India is acknowledged as one of the 4 oldest civilizations at 3200 plus BC. By the way, BC, for those not familiar with BC, means before Christ. And so the current year is 2026. And when we say 3200 BC, or if we say 3000 BC, that is 3000 plus 2026, 5000 years ago, roughly. So 3000 BC means 5000 years back. So Egypt's earliest kings are dated to 3100 BC. Earliest Mesopotamian states and their kings are dated to 3000 to 2500 BC. China and Chinese kings are dated, the earliest dated to 1523 or 1751 BC. So these are the three other old civilizations, and then India. Now, in India, the earliest kingdom or earliest king in India is dated to only about 600 BC. Birth of Gautam Buddha is dated to 563 BC, and Mahavir Swami dated to 599 BC. So 600 after that, we don't have an individual in the currently taught history that is dated to beyond 600 BC. Okay. So question arises, we have our uh, India India's civilization is dated to 3200 BC based on the archaeological excavations, but our earliest royal chronology goes to 600 BC. So what happened to the 2600 years gap in between? And so that's the glaring contradiction. It's not a small contradiction. So the question is, why is this contradiction there? So the critical learning for us is that, and this is hardly anyone knows, I mean, very few people know that the history and chronology taught in schools all over the world, including India, is not the one that was recorded by Indians, but a distorted version created during the British rule, which roughly is from 1800 to 1947, 150 years. Of course, different parts of India came under British rule over a century. So, on average, about 1800, 150 years. And what are the main distortions? So, 5100 plus years of India's timeline chronology was shrunk to 2600 years. Okay, so I said 600 BC plus 2000, so 2600 years. Sri Ram, Sri Krishna, and Mahabharata, they got turned from historical to mythology. Mythology is mythical. By the way, word the mythology myth comes from Sanskrit word mithya. So just to get you, give a little tip there. We have evidence available to prove their historicity. We have Bhagavad Gita's age cut from 5100 years to 2100 years. If you do a Google search, quick Google search, you'll see first century BC for Bhagavad Gita's date. Okay, so that is about 2100 years. And unfortunate part is that these distortions remain even 78 years, even after 78 years of India's independence. And even more sad part is that only a few are aware of these distortions. So let me now give you talk about some major distortions. Okay, we cannot talk about all the distortions, but the major distortions in the chronology. So this chart, it covers from 3200 BC down to 800 AD, so about roughly 4000 years time span. Okay. The chart has two sides. The left-hand side is the true timeline, true chronology. And the right-hand is I call it false chronology. This is what is become the standard in the world for the last 100 years or so. Okay. So if you see, we are told that Gautam Buddha's date is 563 to 483. Okay. Now, his real date is actually 1800 BC, so that is 1300 years earlier. So if you look at Gautam Buddha, the Chandragupta Maurya, Ashoka, Kanishka, and Adi Shankaracharya, these are all post-dated. They have been shifted down by about 1300 years, 1200 to 1400 years, depending on which one you're talking about. Okay, and then prior to that, now we have actually, we'll talk about Mahabharata war, but the Mahabharata war has been just simply called mythical. Okay, just a made up story. Okay, so it's not even considered historical. Vedas were compiled, not composed. Composition happened even much earlier, but these were compiled, into four separate volumes in 3100 plus BC by Ved Vyas. But in our distorted history, we are told that the Vedas were written in around the 1000 BC. And we'll talk about a little bit about how that, if we have time, maybe how that date was determined. But definitely my book has that discussion on it. So you see that, oops, and then Gup, Gupta dynasty shifted down by about 600, and I see if I can hide that. Okay, there it is. Okay, and then we have some other, I think most people are at least familiar with Gautam Buddha and Adi Shankaracharya. Maybe perhaps, at least for the new generation, the Gautam Buddha and Adi Shankaracharya, some of you might have heard of. And then, just not to go into too much detail, but because of this shrinkage of history, Vikramaditya and Shalivan, two of the greatest emperors of India, simply got eliminated from history. So why this distortion, when and how? Okay. So briefly go into the British colonial history. Bengal was the first state in India to fall to the British East India Company in 1757. Asiatic Society was founded by William Jones in 1784 under the patronage of East India Company. And for the first 50 plus years, till 1829, only Europeans were allowed as members of the society. Now, coming back to William Jones, William Jones was told by the Pandits in Bengal that India's chronology went back to at least 3100 plus BC. But William Jones dismissed that from the very beginning. And why he dismissed that? I mean, he dismissed your history goes back that far. He dismissed that. Uh, he staunchly believed in the biblical version of the world history. That is, world started with Adam in 4006 BC. That is about 6,000 years ago. And he believed that Greek chronology, which started at about 600 BC, to be the oldest in the world. Okay, so this was his understanding. And then he started tampering with India's chronology to shorten it. And I'll prove that, why, what's a proof that he believed in biblical version of history. Now, this is the table that I have taken from William Jones's paper. He wrote this, he wrote his paper, he prepared this table in 1788, but this paper was published in the Asiatic Researches Volume 2, published in 1799. Okay, so this is the table from William Jones. Okay, so, and this, the history we'll talk about is of the Magadha. Magadha is Bihar province in eastern India. That the Magadha Empire, used to be in Bihar, and at least the capital was in Bihar. So here, this this history, the chronology starts from 3100 BC and then ends to about 452. So roughly 26 to 2700 years it spans. Okay, and so all the time span in between is accounted for here. So many of you have heard of Jarasandha. Okay, at least people who grew up in India have heard of Jarasandha. Okay, uh, and then so this dynasty ruled for 1000 years, 3100 to 2100 years. And then there's Pradyota dynasty, Shishunaga dynasty, Nanda dynasty, and then there's Maurya dynasty, Sunga dynasty, etc. Okay, so this is the table William Jones had. This is the information he had, but he didn't believe that either. He dismissed that your history can go back to that far back. So now he starts tinkering with the history, the chronology. So both these tables are from the same paper again. Okay. Uh, So here now, this I'm going to spend some time on this table right here. This is directly a photocopy of the table from the journal. Three columns here. The first column labeled Christian and Muslim. So the on the top is Adam and then Noah. Then the middle column is called Hindu column, and then the last column are the years. So it says the year from 1788 of our era. William Jones wrote prepared this table in 1788. Okay, so this number 5794 years before 1788, if we just do a simple math there, it's 4006 BC. So the world started with Adam in 4006 BC. Okay, this is William Jones's table. And then, according to him, Noah came about almost 950 years later, 1000 years later, actually 1000 plus. So there's Noah, and then in about 2950 BC, and then deluge happened in 2350 BC, and then Noah rules for 950 years, and then Noah dies in about 2000 BC. Okay, so this is a proof that William Jones was driven by the biblical version of the chronology, and then here he was trying to fit the Indian history into that biblical version of world history. So here Manu and Hiranyakashipu and Rama and Pradyuta and Buddha, etc. Vikramaditya also. Now let me tell you a little bit about this age 1, age 2, age 3, age 4. Age 1 is the Satya Yuga, age 2 is Treta Yuga, Treta Yuga, and then age 3 is Dwapar Yuga, and age 4 is Kali Yuga. Okay, and so this tells you that William Jones was trying to reconcile Indian history into this timeline, the biblical timeline. And since the deluge happened in 2350 BC, and then Noah died in 2000 BC, basically, and he had to give a few hundred years for the world to repopulate after the deluge. So that means that nowhere in the world the history can go back to beyond 2000 BC. And that's why he put Abhimanyu, son of Arjuna, in 2000 BC. Okay, and then Pradyuta, because I showed you in the previous table that the Pradyuta came after 1000 years of the earlier dynasty. So he put Pradyuta in 1029 BC, and it's right here, the same back calculation. Okay, and he put Buddha also about 2 years later, 1027 BC. Now remember, I told you Buddha's current date is 563 BC. Okay, so, but this is this tinkering has just started over here. Okay, so that's why it's 1000 BC. So this should this is a hard proof that the foundation of our timeline chronology is most unscientific. It is based on the biblical version of world, the chronology that was the prevalent view of the world in the 17th and 18th century Europe, not India, in Europe. And that got forced upon us. And our history got distorted because of this. Unfortunately, that basis of the chronology still remains. We might laugh at this, but that is the sad truth, that this is the foundation of a current chronology. Now let's talk about another key piece here. Sandra Quarters. Sandra Quarters was made the sheet anchor of the chronology. Okay, so previously I told you the overall uh, chronology. Now we have to get more specific. You have to date Buddha and Maurya, etc. Okay, so who's Sandra Quarters? Sandra Quarters is a Indian king described by ancient Greek writers, and is described as being contemporary of Alexander. Alexander invaded India in 326 BC. Okay, so The Greek writers of that time said that there was a king called Sandrakotas in India at that time. So this Sandrakotas was misidentified, mark the word, misidentified as Chandragupta Maurya, who was actually ruling India in 1534 BC. Instead of identifying him with Chandragupta of the Gupta dynasty, Chandragupta I of the Gupta dynasty, which began ruling in about 327 BC. So by misidentifying Sandrakotas as Chandragupta Maurya instead of Chandragupta Gupta, 1200 years of history was wiped out. 1534 minus 326 BC, that's roughly 1200 years. Okay. So somebody who was ruling in 1500 BC was now pushed down to 300 BC. Okay, you see? And then this new date of Chandragupta Maurya became the sheet anchor. It was made the sheet anchor. Why it was the sheet anchor? Because everybody after and before him was newly dated in reference to this 326 date. So Gautam Buddha, Patanjali, Chanakya, Ashoka, and entire Kashmir and Nepal history, everything was pushed down by 1200, 1300, 1400 years. Now what happened? Because of this new but wrong basis, nothing in India's Puranas and literature matched this new basis. So the colonial Indologists declared our Puranas to be unreliable. And then they proceeded to edit the Puranas to justify their new hypothesis or new theory. And here is a proof of that. Proof that they edited Puranas. This is from a book by Frederick Pergeiter, published in 1930. The title of the book is The Purana Text of the Dynasties of the Kali Age, okay, Kali Yuga, with introduction and notes. So he gives the original verse and then gives the altered verse. So in the transliteration, and for those who can read Devanagari, so here is in Devanagari, this is the original verse, and then this original verse is found in Matsya Purana. It is verse 39 from chapter 273. And then this is the altered verse. So the Matsya Purana luckily contains the original verse, but the Vayu Purana that we have available currently contains the altered verse. So you see that how Puranas have been changed. Okay. And this is just one example. There are numerous examples of that. Now, what does this mean? This verse, what is it telling us? Okay. It mentions Saptarshaya. So just briefly, Saptarshaya, it is talking about a Saptarshi calendar. India has had numerous calendars, and I'll talk about the calendars. But Saptarshi calendar is a 2,700 year cycle. It has a 2,700 year cycle. So each 100-year cycle, each century is named after a nakshatra, and there are 27 nakshatras. The 360-degree circle of the sky has been divided into the 27 parts. And so that segment of the sky has been, given a nakshatra name depending on whichever the brightest or the most, dominating star is there in that segment of the sky. Okay. And so when the 2,700 year cycle is over, then again the 28th century will again have the same name as the first century. The cycle starts again. Okay, so what this is saying is that when the Saptarshi calendar that sent, they were in the Magha Nakshatra. I mean, this without going into, they were Pradiptin Agnina Sama, that way they were shining bright, which is actually a code for Magha Nakshatra, basically. And so at that time, so that was the case. And then this will happen again at the time of the Saptavinshati Andranam, Saptamishati is 27, that is 27th Andhra king. So during the time of the 27th Andhra king, that Saptarshi will again be in the same nakshatra. That means the 2700 years would have been completed at the time of 27th Andhra king. That is the chronological information coded in our Puranas here. This is just one example here. And of course, now in altering this verse, what was done here, that, quite a change over here. But instead of Pradipte, Pradipta means shining bright, like fire. Okay. Pratipe, he puts Pratipe instead of Pradipta. Who is Pratipe now? Pratipe is a Sanskrit transformation, but the name is Pratipa. Pratipa is the father of Shantanu. And who is Shantanu? Shantanu is father of Bhishma. Okay, and Bhishma is a very, main character in Mahabharata. So so the entire idea of making this change is that, so Pratipa is almost 4 generations above Yudhishthir, okay, Pandavas. So add 4 more generations in the same time span, okay, in effectively shorten the chronology, okay. So that's where I'll leave it at, to just to show it to you that Puranas were used and edited. So that is how our chronology was brought down from 3138 BC to 600 BC. Huh? The first 2 dynasties accounting for 1100-1200 years were just simply dismissed. Okay, there was no room in the biblical version of chronology. And then the Shishunag dynasty brought down from 1994 BC to 600. Okay, so similarly, you can see from 360 we have 230 years, 100 years to 50 years, 316 years to 137 years, from 300 years to 112 years. Okay, same sequence. Okay, how did the colonials know about this same sequence? They had no other source but our Puranas. Otherwise, there is absolutely no inscription information available about Sisunagananda, okay, and you hardly anything about Maurya, okay. So, except starting from Ashoka, okay. So this is how a chronology history was brought down from 3138 BC to 600 BC. So now this has been known for a while, ever since this project began. People saw that, okay, and they raised their voice. But here are some notable examples. And I'm deeply indebted to these great people on whose shoulders I'm standing. We would not, thanks to these people, we would not otherwise know our true history. So the first person was T.S. Narayan Sastry. He published his book Age of Shankara in 1916. He planned to publish a lot more, but unfortunately he died at a relatively young age of 50 years. So it was a huge loss for us. Then Krishnamacharya republished a volume, History of Classical Sanskrit Literature, 1937. It contains a lot of chronological information, and same for Sankara also. Same for this also. And then in 1950s, Pandit Kota Venkatachalam, he spent about 40 years of his life, or let's say almost his entire career, in researching the history, and it's a monumental work. Really, we should be very indebted to him. And so published 9 books in English and even more in Telugu. He also presented at the All India Conference in Ahmedabad in 1953. And then we have K.D. Setna, published his book Ancient India in a New Light in 1989. Okay, so this is for over more than 100 years. We have all this great work over here, and plus there's a lot more. There are other papers also. So my book is an integration of all this great work, plus some refined with the information available since these works were published. So How do we know that? What are the sources of, how do all these people and I and anybody know? How do we, where do we see our true chronology? So the, there are several sources. One of the most important one is Puranas. Now, of course, we have been taught to just consider Puranas as nothing but the stories, fables, and just to teach some lessons, and that's it. And for the reality is that at least 5 to 6 Puranas, Matsya, Vishnu, Vayu, Brahmanda, Bhagavat, and Bhavishya Purana. These 6 Puranas, they have a section in there which is totally devoted to the genealogy and chronology. Chronology means it will describe not in terms of calendar, but such and such king and such ruled for so long. After that, such and such king came, ruled for so long, and then this dynasty ruled for so long. Okay, that kind of chronology information. Okay. Uh, so the colonial Indologists rewrote India's history based on the list of the kings and dynasties given in the Puranas. They had nowhere else to go but the Puranas. Okay, get this right. Okay, they did not invent history by digging and reading inscription. Okay, that's a much smaller part. Uh, but so what happened? They used the Puranas, but they discarded the chronology given in the Puranas because they started from the Christian or biblical version of world history. They cherry picked the information. They discarded some dynasties and kings, I told you, and then arbitrarily shortened the reign period of the kings. There's another hugely important text that was such an authentic text that is not to be found now. And but how do we know about this? Because it has been quoted in several works. Just like Megasthenes is Indica, Indica does not exist, but it has been quoted in later works, and that's how we know about it. Same here. Now there's yet another huge text, Raj Tarangini. It is basically history of Kashmir, and it covers genealogy and chronology of Kashmir for stretching 5,000 years plus. We also have Nepal Raj Vamshavali. Vamshavali is it is the royal genealogy. It also covers more than 5,000 years. And there's a lot more information. We also have astronomical positions and whatnot. It's all described in chapter 3 of my book. Some switching gears. I mentioned to you earlier that when we're talking about timeline chronology, it is only possible when we have calendars, when we are using calendars. Just to give you example, okay, 258th anniversary of U.S. independence declaration is coming up this year. How do we know it's 258th year anniversary? Because the declaration was done in 1776. That's how we know. If there wasn't a calendar, we would not be able to keep an accurate count. Uh, Everybody will have different counts of that. So good part. So India has a long history of many calendars, and some of those calendars survive even now. Kali Yuga is not a myth; it's a calendar. And so that Kali Yuga, so I had this book published in 26, but current is 5128. Okay. We also have mentioned of the Saptarshi calendar. There's a version of that Saptarshi somewhere. It's called Kashmir Abda because Kashmir is mostly used to use that. Uh, so current year is 5102. And then these two calendars are still very active in India. These are very alive in India. Vikram Samvat, much of North India uses that, and Sali Vansaka, South India. And also, this is actually India's national calendar. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, let me look at the time. Okay. So got about maybe 5 more minutes to go into this. So this is a 33-year-old calendar. So I just wanted to show you for those who can read Devanagari. I know the younger generation probably cannot, but this is tracking the Kali Yuga Shaka and other calendars. I'm gonna go to the next one. This is a chart of the various calendars we have. I'm going to move to the next one over here. And this is another, this evidence for Yudhishthira Shaka. This is inscription dated in Yudhishthira Shaka as uh, by Indologist, colonial Indologist Buchanan, published in 1807. And then Shankaracharya lineage, Acharya lineage in Dwarkamat was recorded, used to be recorded in Yudhishthira Shaka until the starting of Vikram Samvat in 57 BC. And then I want to show you, so there is more evidence for Kali Yuga Shaka, but I want to pass over that. And this go over that. So I mentioned about Megasthenes, Indica, and also the ancient Greek writers. They mentioned that at the time of Alexander, they heard that from Indians that Indians had counted 154 kings by that time, and their total reign period was 6,451 years and 3 months. Keeping track of so many years, millennia, is possible only when there is a calendar. Okay. So if you add 6451 to 326, you get 6777. And in a book published by Alexander Cunningham in 1883, he he mentions the Saptarshi likely started in 6777 BC. I want to show you this genealogy, and that I'll probably end it there. Uh, but so we have extensive genealogy, and I given all the references over here. Okay. Uh, so there are two major dynasties, the earliest dynasties, Chandra dynasties and Surya dynasty. I do not translate Chandra into lunar and Surya into solar. I stay away from that. We don't translate names. It's as simple as that. Uh, Yayati had 5 sons: Yadu, Turvasu, Druyu, Anu, Puru, and Puru. Yadu, Yadu's descendant is Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna, they are called Yadav. His clan was called Yadav. Yadav is nothing but the Sanskrit grammar. When something derived from Yadu, it's called Yadav. Okay. So then Turvasu, we believe that the Turusk people and what present the Turkish people, they could be descendants of Turvasu. Druyu, the European Druids, are probably the descendants of Druyu. And then Anu, and there's another branch in my other appendices that shows Anu's branch. And then Puru, the rest of this is Puru's branch over here. So we have 5 major branches from here. And then we have Dushyanta. Again, this is, his son was Bharat, and on whose it is believed that Bharat, India's name, Bharat, is based on named after Bharat. Okay. Few generations after him came Hasti, and he established Hastinapur. And then he had some 3 sons, and so his descendant of Ajamid is Kuru, and we have Kurukshetra. Probably some of you have heard of Kurukshetra, and it's in Haryana. And then one of the branch leads to Drupad. And then I'll show you from Kuru. We have 3 more branches actually. So from Kuru, then we end up here with Dhritarashtra and Pandu. Okay, and then I mentioned Pratipa, Shantanu. And then over here, we have Chedi and Magad branches. At some point, the Magad branch begins from here, and then from in which branch Jarasandha came. Okay, so the point I would like to make is this possible to just simply make up? I don't think so. I mean, it would be a miracle if somebody really, it's impossible to make all this up. And I just showed you only a sample of this. So we just, genealogy just simply cannot be ignored. Mahabharata war, just very briefly now. So we are almost at the end of our time, and I'll just take a minute only over here. That the importance of Mahabharata war is, one is that it is a sheet anchor for our chronology. That is, So many years after Mahabharata war, such and such thing happened. Nanda came to throne. Nanda dynasty came to throne 1500 years after Mahabharata war. And that I was showing the Saptarshi and all that. So Mahabharata is the dating. That's why the dating of Mahabharata is so important. And then here is uh, uh, I wanna show you this. This is a Google map of a place called present-day Rajgir, which was actually the in ancient name was Girivraj, and it was the capital of Jarasandha, the entire Magad dynasty for thousands of years before they switched moved to Patliputra. So you can see the Mahabharata describes this place surrounded by 5 mountains, and that's exactly what you see. Now they didn't have satellite photograph, satellite, imagery at that time, but see, it's the information in Mahabharata is that accurate. So obviously, this cannot be made up, and this is placed, 1,000 miles away, and someone is writing about that. And then this is the eye hole inscription, which gives the date of the uh, Mahabharata war and Kali Yuga, etc. And I will end at this point to allow time for questions and answers.
Anilji, thank you so much for this discussion and taking the time to speak with our Ekal Vidyalaya Houston chapter this evening. This has been certainly a very unique perspective on Indian history that I personally have not heard about before, and I think we're definitely all taking away something new from it. So I will go ahead and pause the recording here and we can move into a Q&A session with our audience.
Great. Wonderful.
Anilji, let me just say that it was a very, very, very informative session.